Okay, y'all. Thank you for coming to my presentation on stereotypes and conspiracies. My name is Rebecca Brown, as you guys all know. And so before we start out and I give like a background on stereotypes and conspiracies, I actually wanted to start with a slam poetry video. Y'all hear this?
Yep.
Yeah.
We learned your French. We learned your English, we learned your Spanish, we learned your Dutch, your Portuguese, your German. You learned our nothing, you called us stupid. That's white privilege. And I'm sure it probably hurts for you to hear those two words, kind of like gunshots and explosions from those commissioned to protect you with whisking past your ears. What is white privilege? It is the only 5 decades of legal acknowledgement expected to correct 400 years of white transgression. It is crack versus cocaine. Blacks receiving almost 20% longer sentences for the same exact offenses. Like, for instance, a black man without a record is less likely to get a job than a white felon, or maybe it's because we're lazy and we don't work hard enough. Like, what the fuck? 400 years in the same field literally is an incredible resume builder. It is Katrina answering the government's prayers of eugenics, Dick Cheney going fishing the next day, Condoleezza on a shopping spree, Bush in San Diego, but Kanye is the one you call crazy because, like, it only took the USA 2 days to get aid to Asia, but 5 for FEMA to get to Canal Street and Esplanade. It is the one black kid who beat the shit out of the odds, but only thanks to Sandra Bullock, Michelle Pfeiffer, and the White Shadow, so now we all can make it. It is the only time thousands of white people are cheering for the black kid to win. It is in the stadium. It is you looking at me crazy if I told you to go back to Europe, even though we didn't have a say. It is you all of a sudden having a problem with immigration, like this isn't even your nation. How the hell do you discover some shit that wasn't even missing to begin with? You Columbus our traditions. Had white girls twerking in high definition with multicolored hair and purple nails, but it was ghetto when we did it. Oh, I'm making you uncomfortable. Try a cramped slave ship. But wait. Slavery is over now. It's just called the prison system because, like, you're not racist because you don't use the N-word, but y'all use niggas every day. What is white privilege? It is the acceptance of bombs over Baghdad, but not over Boston. It is European history being taught as a major and African as an elective. It is learning about my people only 28 days, like I'm not black every fucking second as every white boy. With the fuck my brains out, not because I'm pretty, but because I'm pretty for a black girl. It is people thinking that Africa is one nation. It is the waving of the Confederate flag like you didn't lose the battle and then telling us to get over slavery. It is people saying that black people destroyed neighborhoods, but forgetting that white people have destroyed continents. It is every time I bring up my plight, some white man has to tell me that I'm crazy, but is kind enough to praise my English or say that we are all given the same opportunities, even though he has a family history of wealth, and I don't even know my family history at all. Is the justification of police brutality. Like, what did that person do? I'm sure it doesn't hurt as much when the victim doesn't look like you. It is people thinking that affirmative action is an unfair advantage instead of keeping the qualified from being unfairly disadvantaged or throwing out a qualified applicant because their name sounded too African American. Is Newports imported into black communities, but black boys exported for weed as big plastic asses that are called fat when we naturally have them. It is an Australian woman whose new classic of rap music is everyone who hears this poem dismisses all this truth I just spit as reverse racism. That is white privilege. Thank you.
So yeah, that's it's kind of a little introduction of a little bit about like what we're gonna be talking about today. Sorry. Hold on. Is this on full screen? Sorry.
Yeah, it's on presenter mode.
Yeah. We're just gonna go further. So where to begin? Today we're kind of going to be speaking a little bit about both like the everyday stereotypes as well as kind of the conspiracy theories that have kind of been built up in America throughout many years, and things that we kind of view as normal today, but kind of like deeper looking into the roots of these different ideas. So 2 examples I wanted to specifically look at were the Sambo and the Jim Crow caricatures. So Sambo caricature is the like caricature of a happy slave kind of. It's kind of like the docile Black man who was portrayed in like early America, portraying around slavery. And we're gonna get into how both of these examples are like very closely knitted to a lot of our views today of different people and a lot of Black people in like pop culture and just in our everyday life. And then the second caricature we're looking at is like the Jim Crow caricature as well. And so we're talking about how these perceptions have been generalized and become social norms. And then how that kind of ends up going into stereotypes, conspiracy theories surrounding erasure, as well as distrust and uncertainty around the Black community. And so in this slide, I also have pictures of different stereotypes throughout the years, as well as in the bottom right corner, talking about the Tuskegee experiment. And so, yeah. So current day examples of these stereotypes and conspiracy theories coming into play every day is athleticism in the Black community and how that's become stereotyped of like the overly athletic, like excelling in like sports only, and things like that, and how that becomes a backhanded stereotype. We're also talking about conspiracy surrounding specifically the pyramids, which I think is really interesting. And then conspiracy about the origin of AIDS, and how that kind of manifests in the Black community. So starting out, the athleticism stereotype specifically, I think is really interesting when you're looking at it through the lens of with the Sambo caricature, because it's kind of like an interesting play on like the happy slave that it's like I was watching a lot of interviews and stuff like that, and a lot of the athletes are saying like, I only feel like I have worth like to certain people when I'm on the field, and like, I'm only kind of like given that pedestal when I'm on the field. And it's like that's cause, so we see all these pictures of athletes and stuff like that, so they're so happy and all their wealth and stuff like that, but it's kind of like that happy slave that it's like only when you're playing and entertaining for another group are you like truly on this pedestal. And so yeah, that's kind of like a reflection of that exploitation, kind of like of how one is always kind of a slave to another's like for another's entertainment. Next, we're talking about the pyramids. So it's interesting. I learned a lot about like this thing called pseudo-archaeology, and it's talking about how like people like will say that the pyramids and things like that are so grand that there's no way that somebody else could have created them or that another group of peoples could have created them. And as a result, they blame it on aliens, which is like really interesting when you think about it, thinking about not only is that kind of erasure of another person's identity and own experience, especially in slavery, because that's denying all that happened and all they had to go through in order to make these extreme feats happen, but also to kind of say like aliens and things like that. It's kind of that like implied otherness, and kind of like bringing the people from the borderlands, which we'll talk about later, and alienating them literally. And then next, the conspiracy theory around like the AIDS theory is really interesting because it speaks a little bit about the Black community and like how they believe that AIDS was coming from the government and stuff like that. And it kind of shows that through all of the different experiments that have been put, like that our people have been put through, there is kind of this like gain distrust that ends up being kind of a culture-wide acceptance of different conspiracy theories about us, because we aren't able to actually get the truth from the information that we're provided. So restraints and challenges that I see in my decolonization journey are kind of these things like these stereotypes and these conspiracy theories that are kind of created and put into our everyday, that we aren't really able to connect with each other or one another like anymore, just because we have these prejudices always before we even interact with those around us. And like after taking this class, I was able to see kind of that indigenous teaching kind of like address this kind of like I feel like it's kind of like mold infesting in our communities, and like it's kind of like addressing that and eradicating it, because it's kind of speaking about how as long as we keep a learning spirit and like an open mind and are able to always connect with one another, then as a result we'll kind of always be able to like promote communication in between one another and actually like able to see other perspectives, which is really important in decolonization, because without being able to have the open rhetoric, it's really never there's never going to be healing. Like it can't just be one group yelling at another for one to listen. There has to actually be like acceptance and kind of slowing down and like understanding um from one another's side. And that kind of also promotes like understanding like the need for biodiversity and things like that, not only with the plants and the animals and all those things that we're going to need to heal the earth and like things like that, but also it's within like the human race and like making connections no matter kind of the chasm it seems is between each different like race or religion or all those different kind of niche groups that we have created socially. And so why am I so invested in this? I want to understand these different aspects and why these things develop in our community, because especially as a Black woman, I find it so important to kind of like learn how to communicate, and going on in the future, I think it's essential to understand the perspectives of one another and understand like how these things that we're taught or we'll just kind of be hearing about in everyday life can affect our psyche and like our just kind of ability to understand one another. And resources I think that are really important to use in my decolonization journey are social media and promoting classes such as like this class that I'm currently taking about indigeneity, and learning about kind of like the different columns and things like that, and like how this journey is meant to kind of bring us all together, not like further polarize us. And I think that like once you kind of begin to take that effort, like and make those steps yourself, um, there really will be kind of like feedback from the community, and like you'll be able to kind of continue this kind of like chain reaction. Um, so environments in which like stereotypes and conspiracy theories are perpetuated are environments that promote xenophobia, glorification, marginalization, and ignorance. And I found this interesting, like as I've kind of studied all of this more, understanding how they connected with one another. And so like as there is more, like without the effort to understand one another, there is built up of like xenophobia and like fear of the unknown and not understanding kind of how to connect with others. And that means, like ignorance and further speaking to others in like ways that are poor and things like that, and like spreading other lessons of ignorance, and further marginalizing other groups. And I thought that like kind of the most ironic thing out of all of this was that as a result of all of this is kind of some sort of like glorification of like that marginalized group. Like, like we hear every day about appropriation and stuff like that, and like all those different aspects of not knowing about one's like community or not taking the effort to kind of like understand the origins of all of these different kinds of things, and then still wanting to use it to your own advantage. But like, like she said in the video, like shunning me when I'm going to wear my hair a certain way, but when other people do, it's something to be celebrated and things like that. And so I think that like kind of what we're kind of called to do is like to kind of promote like a disruption and like dismantling of kind of like all these different stereotypes and conspiracy theories that we see every day, and we're just like we take for face value. But I think that we need to question it more. Like there is something that we need to actively do, as opposed to just kind of like ignore like like okay, whatever, this happens, or like Black athletes and things like this, you see these and you see these trends and patterns and things like that every day. But like it's it's important to actually address that and say like, what does this mean and why might this be a trend and things like that. I think it's really important. And like, like in order to stop like, like promoting erasure, like thinking about different things that are like, like what's the true origin, even like Thanksgiving just passed, like what's the true origin of Thanksgiving? Like, is it really what we take it for, what they tell us? Like things like that, that it's like important to kind of stop like the denial of other people's identities and actually start like taking this information and saying like, processing it and finding the information you can. Here's my works cited. And thank you everyone for listening. Hold on.